this is my legal authority, but there's no public trust.
Power can be postponed if it's in the interest of the people.
If you are a backer of so-and-so party, certain things will go your way.
Right to information must be a right of the rakyat.
Hello everyone, welcome to a very special episode of Beyond the Headlines, the go-to space for the top stories that made the headlines and more. I'm Amalina Kamal, and for 2025, of course, when we look back, it was not necessarily a year of dramatic collapse, but it was a year of uncomfortable questions about power, reform, justice, and whether Malaysia is moving forward fast enough or simply learning how to stand still more elegantly. As we look back on what has transpired thus far, joining me on set to look at the top stories, I have with me Najmuddin Najib, NSC's very own associate editor. Welcome, Naj, to Beyond the Headlines.
Hi, how are you? I'm glad to be back.
Glad to have you here. I mean, it's been a few episodes in, right? But having to have you in our year-ender, I think it's a nice way to close the year.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a bit of a change from being behind the desk and a computer at the same time. So yeah, I'm always happy to be here. Yeah.
Well, I just want to ask you this first before we dive deeper into the discourse that we have today. How was 2025 for you as a newsman? What were you most excited about? What enticed you the most, and what disappointed you?
I can't say much in terms of disappointments, but there were a few news items which were of particular interest. I think on the political front, the effects of the Sabah general election are still being felt. We saw the waning influence of federal-based political parties on the Sabah political landscape. The rise of how Warisan put up a strong fight against GRS, and how DAP was completely wiped out. Even PKR had very little influence on what happened. So that was particularly interesting for us here in the Semenanjung side.
Yeah.
And I think on the courts side, we also just recently, a few days ago, saw how Datuk Sri Najib Razak punya court case kan, his bid for house arrest was stymied by the courts.
Correct. Yeah.
But I think from a selfish standpoint, from a media practitioner standpoint, what I was most excited about was the setup of the Malaysian Media Council, which was something 50 years in the making. It actually allows the media industry to chart its own path, and decide its own rules. Of course, with the government's help and all that. But of course, I think, I think that's what I'm most excited about for this year, where it puts the media on actually the right path towards deciding its own future.
Well, hold that thought, because I think that's also part of the institutional reforms that we will be discussing further. And of course, joining us to brighten up the discourse we have Datuk Sri Dr. Jahaberdeen Yunoos, Senior Lawyer and Rapera founder. Again, here, not your first time, right?
It's not my first time, yes.
But I hope that this is also not, something that...
Not my last time.
Last time as well. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Good to see you again, Amalina. Good to see you again, Naj.
Likewise.
And your questions,
because we've heard what Naj had to say. I'm very curious to know what you have to say as well, like how 2025 has been for you and how has the outlook been for Malaysia.
Okay. Now, 2025 has been a year, Amalina, which gives me total ups and downs, like a roller coaster, and also mixed feelings. Now, we look at it, I'm from Bandar Utama, and I think you remember the horrific killing that happened in Bandar Utama school, where this little girl was murdered by a schoolmate. And that's horrifying, because beyond that is a bigger issue. I'm hoping that's something that we can look at, the government can look at, the people can look at. That's horrifying. And that also got to do with bullying. And this year we find there's so many bullying cases, whether in Sabah, Sarawak, and even in Malaysia, so on. That has been very shocking and disturbing in terms of educational and social. In terms of law, Amalina, has been, again, a very, inverted commas, exciting, horrifying year for the legal profession. You have the retirement of Tengku Maimun, where she's considered to be a very reformist judge.
Chief Justice,
Chief Justice as well. And also you have various things that happen in the legal profession and in the legal fraternity. For example, who is going to be the AG? That was a big issue. And there was also the issue of integrity of the Attorney General's chambers itself, and the Judicial Appointments Committee itself, and also the judiciary itself was under a microscopic eye view. And I agree with Naj that Sabah was another matter that excites us. because it is politically interesting and it also shows probably a political dynamic change in the country as to the polling, voting, and also as to the voter maturity.
Yep.
And the question as to whether or not federal incumbency can actually pull the votes at the state level, and those kind of interesting issues as well. And of course, I being also a columnist for more than 20 years, almost, I'm very passionate about press freedom in the country. So I'm equally excited with you about the Malaysian Media Council. I only pray that with the Malaysian Media Council, it is not just another institutional drama or something put in the putting ice lah.
Sure.
Something courageous, something
like
brave.
A tokenism.
Sorry?
Like a tokenism, you mean?
No, it's like a tokenism. I hope something, it's something, it can do something, reforms, etc. But I think it's a very good forward step. And one more thing that I think which is very good, which is done by Datuk Seri Azalina, is the Online Security Council as well.
Yes.
That has also been formed, and now they have a pro tem committee. I think in that sense, it has been, on one hand, from the legal perspective, full of reform. On the other hand, much, much more that can be done. On the social aspect, we learned a lot of lessons this year. I hope the lessons that we learned this year, we carry forward to 2026 with better improvements.
So, Datuk,
Yeah.
just spilling over into what you just mentioned or what you've just broken down there in terms of the law and order, right? We talk about repression versus reform, but we also want to understand if there is a renewed sort of faith towards our institution. Do you think that is so? Especially with, again, you've mentioned, you've highlighted Datuk Sri Azalina's division having to push for some sort of efforts from the government to listen to the public or made some, materialize wishes by the public.
Yeah. Well, my personal view is that I see that the educated public, they are more hopeful that there would be greater and greater reforms in this country. But nevertheless, I think the general public still feel there's still a trust deficit. I think it's going to take a long time to recover, to improve this trust deficit. And that's probably because there are many things that also happened this year, which while we become confident about certain institutions, for example, you talk about the FOI, the Freedom of Information Act and the Freedom of Information Bill. Now, until today, we still don't have the Freedom of Information Bill or Act. And that's very telling because people keep asking this question, what is so secret about what the government does? And that's a very important question. What is so secret about what the government does? And we talk about the government, we're talking about two governments. I always say that there are two governments. One is a political government, the ministers and so on and so forth who come and go, who create the policies, who try to monitor. But the more important government to me is the civil service, the government that's actually governing the country. Now, when you think about it, Amalina and Naja, when you think about it, it's very, very important that the civil servants are transparent with the information and what they do. And of course, you being a civil servant, you do not want to be accountable. You don't want to be held responsible for whatever decisions are made. And that I can understand because if you look at the way civil servants work, and I have dealt with civil servants some years ago on wearing a certain hat. And you look at them, there's a pengarah, there's a ketua pengarah, ketua bahagian, and so on and so forth. So a decision is made by committees and so on and so forth. But whenever something goes wrong, then they look for a scapegoat.
Of course.
But from the rakyat's perspective, it is very important for the rakyat to understand and for the government to understand that we require a civil servant which is transparent and accountable because each and every decision must be accounted for. That's number one. Number two, in terms of, and he's very passionate about it, and in terms of freedom of information, I think, as a matter of fact, generally, right to information must be a right of the rakyat. What I'm saying is, you do not go and apply for an information.
Okay.
The information must be given to the media as of right. And if the government does not want to give the media the information, then the government must give the reason not to. Unlike what I think most governments are trying to do is that they say that those who require the information must provide reasons why you require it. The government should say this is why we cannot give you. In other words, as a matter of right, every rakyat is entitled to the information. And why not so? You are the civil servant. You have all the information. As a rakyat, I want to have access to the information. And there are many reasons why we want to have access. One is, of course, to hold you accountable. because whatever decision you make is going to affect the nation and the rakyat. That's number one. Number two, whatever decision you make is costly. And this is something people always forget. Committees cost money. Everything there costs money. Therefore, is that decision that you're making ROI is a return on investment that the money we're putting in. And thirdly, of course, is how can I be a informed citizen? How can I make right decisions about the country and so on and so forth as a citizen, as media, as a stakeholder, if I do not have the information in my hand?
Okay, so to that, my question would be, how can institutions survive on legal authority alone if there's no public trust? Because then whoever's on the administrative side will come back with that sort of rhetoric, right? Yeah, I'm within this capacity to share information, to withhold information. But, you know, if you stand by having to have or to project that, oh, this is my legal authority, but there's no public trust, to what extent can administration survive?
Okay, you're absolutely correct. There's always a debate between legal authority and public trust. As a lawyer, I would say the public trust is extremely important, because whatever legal authority you have, if there's no public trust, then legal authority has got no function whatsoever. Right. But having said that, however, it is that legal authority that we must create, we must draft it. The legal authority must be drafted and designed in such a way that it actually enhances public trust. And there can only be public trust if you're willing to divest, to share the information that you have. Only if you're willing to be responsible, then the public says, this civil service is accountable. And this is extremely important. I hope that the public in 2026 will realize and make it important that civil service must be accountable. Freedom of information is very important because ministers come and go. The true governance is in the civil service. And we need to know what's happening.
True. Let me ask you a question. What sort of safeguards do you think that are still missing when it comes to preventing justice from being read through, purely political lenses, for example?
Okay, the very question that you asked, Daj, is relevant, but it's frightening. Why is it that you need to ask that question? I think you're asking that question because there is a perception in this country that justice is still banned. Justice is still manipulated by the political masters. And as a lawyer, I think that's very, very bad for the cause of justice in this country. And that happens because of, I would largely blame the politicians. If you read the press, you read the media, every day it is the politicians who are actually chastising the judiciary, chastising the judicial system. They're saying, look, this is selective prosecution, and so on and so forth. So there's a problem of perception in the country. Now, I've said this many times, while I believe that there should be freedom of expression, but I believe in responsible freedom of expression.
Of course. Yeah.
So there need to be a check and balance as far as protecting the judiciary is concerned. Now, fair criticism of the judiciary is allowed. Fair criticism of the Attorney General's chambers is allowed. However, when politicians get excessive, I think some form of legal action ought to be taken. Otherwise, this will continue to cause the judiciary and the legal system to be in disrepute. I mean, that would be my response to that.
Okay. Fair.
I mean, as we are discussing this, I do like to highlight that there seems to be a great disconnect between reformist rhetoric and how operational administration works, especially when it comes to governance, right? But 2025 also saw the rising sort of accusations of there's selective prosecution in a lot of high-profile cases. You have a lot of, still within the theme of law and order. So how damaging is this, especially towards the public's, appreciation towards the Madani government, at least?
Okay, if you look at this selective prosecution word, I've written an article about this, The word selective prosecution is about the most misunderstood word. And again, politicians start bending this word selective prosecution. Legally, there's no such thing as selective prosecution. Legally, something called malicious prosecution, meaning you're saying that the Attorney General's chambers have maliciously prosecuted you. What that means is there's no evidence against you, there's no real charge against you, but they simply find something and charge you in court, carrying, regardless of whether you're going to be found acquitted or not. Even there's no evidence. That's malicious prosecution. Now, when we talk about selective prosecution, I think what the public or those who say that means is that why do you charge him and not me? Why do you charge A? Why don't you charge A? Why don't you charge only me?
Yeah.
So that's what they mean. Now, Amalina, when we look at this, this allegation of selective prosecution unfortunately only arises when politicians are being charged. I've been a lawyer almost for 30 years. I do criminal cases. My clients get charged in court every other day. Nobody screams selective prosecution. And of course, when you look at the term selective prosecution, I would say that even the Attorney General's chambers have to select who to prosecute. And that selection of who to prosecute will depend on a variety of things. Number one is the evidence sufficient for prosecution? You may find that a person is guilty in the moral sense, but in the legal sense, it requires the necessary evidence, so on and so forth. So you got to select in that sense. What I would say is, why does this impression of selective prosecution appear in society? Is a politician. So the politician will stop saying this. Should stop alleging there is selective prosecution unless they can prove that there is indeed a malicious prosecution. But I see your point. We need to do something very seriously about the perception that there is something wrong with the institutional thing in this country.
It goes back to the perception, I mean, to how everything is still viewed through political lenses, right?
True.
So I suppose that requires a maturity on society part, I suppose, right? On how we view certain things. Like it's not just black and white. It should not be viewed through very narrow lenses.
Correct.
Yeah.
And one more thing I may add, if you ask, since you asked Madani, I mean, I believe Anwar is trying to do as much as he can to bring about various reforms, etc. Through even Datuk Azalina has done quite a few things.
Let's go into Parliament, Judiciary and independent bodies then. Because we obviously know that institution building remains a mixed story. Maybe you have your opinion, anyone else watching might have their own respective opinion, right? But in this particular case, why do you think institutional reforms, again, can succeed on paper but struggle in practice? Because we have ideas. You already laid it down as well. We have the sort of ideal measures, right, to exercise and practice. But why do you think we don't necessarily see it that much?
Okay, unfortunately, that one I've got a personal experience as well. I'm an idealist. I founded Rapera with the hope that I can create thinking and compassionate citizens. I've been at it for the past 20 years. I even have an experimental group of 200 people, and yet I find that I fail again and again and again. I fail again and again in hoping that these values can be imbibed. That's because reform on paper plus what happens in reality is there's always a disjoint between the two. Why? Because, Amalina, we may have institutional reforms, but what about cultural reforms? You look at the politicians, for instance. I want to commend the Prime Minister for the Parliamentary Services reform.
Yes,
And that's brilliant. That's something good that he has done. However, I sympathize with him. He's got the challenge of the cultural reform and the political habits which die hard in Parliament. So these are the challenges that we face. So while we're doing the institutional reforms, we also need to focus on the cultural reforms as well. And I may be not very popular for saying this, we have a lot of bad cultural habits in Malaysia. Plenty, whether it's socially, politically or economically.
But you do think that the parliamentary service reform is somewhat of an isolated win? It's good, but it's
Very
somewhat
good.
of an isolated win.
It is not isolated win. I think we need to give it time. We need to give it time because, as I said earlier, because the political habits and the cultural reform which will take place in the long run. Otherwise, there's no other way of doing it. But it's brilliant. That one I commend.
I think even before the Parliamentary Service reform, the Reform Act was passed, or it was tabled, I think the Azalina's ministry had a mini briefing with the editors, and to explain to us what she was setting out to do, what it aimed to achieve, and all that lah. So on that front, I think that was a refreshing punya way of doing it. Basically, you are giving the media oversight of what they plan to achieve, and so you are basically getting them on your side lah. So I think transparency in that sense help a lot also with regards to how
And the Prime Minister's question time, that's another good move as well.
Okay.
That has never happened before. That's very good.
Mendekati rakyat lah.
Unfortunately, see, we are a country of slogans. I hope we will stop being sloganeering and be more substantial, I think that's also another cultural trait that we should got to get rid of. But having said that, however, with the Prime Minister's question time, I fail to see the MPs taking advantage of it. because they're still politicking instead of substantially raising issues that are near to the rakyat. Educational issues, economic issues, even political reform issues. And if you notice, there's been almost zero political reform. Reform semua area ada tau.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you're talking about, say, political funding,
Precisely.
and all that lah. Okay.
Precisely, political funding, how do you do away with this politicians still being able to collect millions and millions of dollars under the pretext of political donations.
Sure.
So these are all very important political
Sure.
reform that must happen.
Sure.
And also the responsibility of politicians when they utter sentences in public, especially in the sense of how Islam is being abused and manipulated by politicians in this country. That must stop. And that must, as a Muslim, I'm saying this, that must really stop. Politicians should not have a license to say whatever they want about Islam. As a Muslim, I'm oppressed by those kind of statements.
Okay, so again, with that, right, so what sort of constitutional guardrails should Malaysia focus on to ensure genuine executive accountability here? Especially if they start to utilize religion, race as a political mileage, right?
Okay, I find our Malaysian constitution remarkable. I mean, it's a remarkable document. Right down to its protection of the civil liberties, even on the freedom of religion under Article 11, even Article 3, even Article 153, all remarkable. The question is interpretation. It is ink and paper. But who are these people interpreting it? Are those people who interpret it honest enough? Do they have the intellectual capacity to do so? That's very, very important. Why I'm saying that is because in Malaysia, with the greater respect, I find that we have now really lowered our standards. In many areas, we really lowered our standards completely. So coming back to that, so we have to intellectual. So if you look at the act, the Constitution, for instance, judiciary is very important. The judiciary must be able to make the best possible interpretation of the Constitution which safeguards democracy. Now you can have a judiciary many years ago, for instance, which is very pro-government interpretation. Don't forget, judges are human beings who make interpretations.
Sure.
So it goes back, the interpretation they make goes back to their leaning, of course on the law, but towards their leaning, towards their how brave they are, how courageous they are, and so on and so forth, and the level of the intellectual ability as well. So that's one. So they have to make. Number two is the politicians. We need credible politicians with integrity, who are able to speak fluently, substantively, not shallow manner like what we're having today, for instance. Rhetorics. We need to move to a different. This is already political culture, lah.
Sure.
And on the Islamic side, we need to have leaders. If you want to speak of Islam, speak, but speak with substance. I'm not talking about the muftis who are academic and who are giving all the sound advice. That's different. These politicians who are abusing religion, that must stop. And there must be a reform in this country which prevents politicians from abusing religion, especially Islam. But which politician is brave enough to do this?
Some issues, I suppose, are so entrenched in sense of how some people will react. So it's a minefield, right? If you want to actually broach into
actually,
those
it's not the people. See, if you look at the political society in this country, it's very clear. Yeah, whenever politicians say people, what they mean, they're supporters. We must be very clear about that. Even if you look at the election, for instance, are you saying that 60% of the people voted? Look at the statistics. So you'll see the reality of it. Democracy is not about majority. Democracy is about who goes the goalpost. One undi extra dapat lah. So whenever politicians say the people have spoken, be careful. They're talking about their supporters. The people have not spoken. Jadi, in this country, you find that, especially in Islam, we all say it is sensitive. No, it is sensitive to that politician's power base, not sensitive to the Islamic jurisprudence. Tak kena mengena dengan jurisprudence pun. Tak kena mengena dengan akidah pun.
As a legal practitioner, that irritates you, obviously.
As a Muslim, it irritates me.
Okay.
Because I feel oppressed. I feel oppressed that these politicians are disturbing my right to ubudiyah towards my God, towards Allah. But I see your point. You see, this is where judges are very important and institutions are very important, and this tool of judicial reform is very important. And there's something called the judicial review. Say, for example, you have a politician making certain statements or the government passing certain policies. How do you challenge it? We can go by way of judicial review. But for that to happen, again, you require a strong judiciary. Dia macam ni lah. You have to be intellectual and honest to the facts instead of getting carried away by sentiments, getting carried by emotions. You're a leader. But the rakyat also must be careful lah. Are you able to distinguish between the leader and a politician? Different, no? A statesperson and a politician are two different things. A politician only thinks about the next election and his power base. A statesperson thinks about the state, the country, the people.
Again, it's popularity is the key question here as well, because it gets them the vote. But do you think, to some extent, some politicians in Malaysia has found a way to utilize the constitutional limits to their own benefit?
The constitution is perfect. It's there already. It is the people. It is the politicians, the judiciary, all those people in power. Are they willing to do what they need to do according to the law in the country? That's it.
Anyway, we are discussing this only because within the context of the freedom of expression and how we navigate the rhetorics that are being thrown out today. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you watching do know, to some extent, sometimes these forms of instances even, showcase itself in the form of now, people are debating about this whole pet-friendly spaces. I mean, and then you have like different opinions to how we think. The debate continues, but at the end of the day, I think what you're trying to say is like put some thought into any sort of extreme sort of rhetorics that are being thrown out as well lah.
Yeah.
Anyway, still going into transparency when it comes to reforms and everything. The public, as we all know, has been pushing for the government to ensure that there's independence of the new Ombudsman institution. Can I have your thoughts on that as well? And where are we, and can we actually realize it the next year?
Okay. See, Ombudsman is very, very, very important. Ombudsman is not only important in democracy, Ombudsman is very important in life. What is an Ombudsman? An Ombudsman basically means an official there who will take your complaints. While taking your complaints against government agency, he also protects you. I mean, it is like in a family, you have either your father or your mother who listen to your grouse. And that's good. Because if your grouses are heard, then the person who's hearing your grouse or your complaint can navigate you or address your complaints somehow or other, and you feel satisfied. What happens when your complaints are not heard or addressed? What happens? Mengamuk lah.
Yes.
That's when you go to protest. So, while on one hand, I would say that protest is not against democracy, but it's a feedback to democracy. And when we say that protest is a feedback to democracy, the government must take a step back and say, hey, why is this feedback taking place through a protest? Meaning, we don't have an ombudsman. You follow, yeah?
Yep.
So therefore, an ombudsman is extremely important because that is the avenue through which the ordinary rakyat can give their feedback to the government, through various agencies, through various institutions and so on and so forth. And similarly, in the context of ombudsman also, we require strong, independent parliamentary committees. And these parliamentary committee must be of people of integrity. That's also another way by which feedback can be given to the government. So all these things are very important and goes back, tying back again with the Freedom of Information Act. Can you see all these are connected to each other?
What would it require for the Malaysian Ombudsman to be an extremely effective complaints mechanism and not reduce it to just a mere complaints desk, for
Correct.
example. Yeah.
Which the tickets get piled up and eventually it doesn't get addressed.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be tabled next year, next parliamentary session. Kan? Expected lah. The details are still a bit hazy, But then, based on your experience, have you seen maybe examples of this being done in other countries, perhaps, to varying degrees of effectiveness? What can be done here to emulate the better parts of how it's done elsewhere? Yeah.
I am praying that since 2018, when there's uncertainty among the politicians, this uncertainty among the politicians will make them aware that each of the politicians in power is in their interest to ensure that the most independent institutions exist. Because they may be out of power in the next round. Therefore, in terms of the Ombudsman, I'm hoping that they would appoint the chairman or whatever the Ombudsman, a person who's not an apple polisher.
Okay.
Very, very important.
Okay.
Not an apple polisher. And in this context also, I would say generally, never appoint a civil servant. Because civil servant has been trained his entire life to say, saya menurut perintah.
Or governed by the OSA even at the moment, right? That's the current.
That's a different issue altogether. The Official Secrets Act. That's a bit different.
I mean, but trained to secrecy lah in that sense.
Trained to secrecy. Not only that, the attitude. The attitude of whether he's able to look at it holistically, whether able to look at it objectively. So that's number one. It's very important. The person who's going to chair it must be somebody who's not apple polisher, who's of high integrity, who's got the ability to look at things open-mindedly and so on. That's number one. Number two is the members of the Ombudsman, very, very important. I believe it must be diverse. Not only lawyers, but lawyers, ordinary people, lay people, because you're going to hear complaints from the public. And complaints from the public, you require people in the Ombudsman with different perspectives. Because lawyers have a certain perspective. Media have a certain perspective. We all carry our own professional biases and prejudices. So we need to take that into account when we create an Ombudsman. So once we have that, that's a very good start for the public to have an avenue through which they can give their complaints. And this Ombudsman can filter those complaints. And God willing, from the Ombudsman and those certain complaints, we can probably draft better laws. At the end of the day, Amalina and Naja, the laws exist for what? For the betterment of the nation and the people. So I'm excited. I'm waiting to see the Ombudsman, and I hope this country, or not this country, I hope that the politicians in this country will surprise me by having an Ombudsman which is not just apple polishing.
Sure. There have been some opinions which say that in the makings of a really effective Ombudsman hinges solely on its degree of independence, right? And then who he reports to matters greatly.
Very good.
He should not report to just anyone, but probably perhaps even to Parliament.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would suggest Parliament. Parliament will be the best.
Because within Parliament itself, we have our breakdown, right? You've got this the special select committees, and then but of course in Parliament itself, it also boils back to the parliamentary service reforms.
Yeah.
To what extent has it been refined to shoulder ombudsman institutions, so similar entities as such, right? Okay, although not mainstream, but it has made headlines, is this particular, debate on whether the prime ministership should be just, capped at 10 years. Your thoughts?
Okay, my thought is I don't have a number in mind, but I don't believe that any single individual should be given a long tenure. Probably 10 years is 2 terms.
Yes.
That may make sense because 1 term itself is not enough to carry out anything. I mean, if you do a cabinet reshuffle today, I find it so funny because you do a cabinet reshuffle today, in 1.5 years, how much can a minister do in that ministry? Especially if you know how the ministries work. By the time you get approval from the civil servants, it will take probably 1.5 years. So having said all that, so 2 years, 2 terms for a prime minister should be sufficient. Too long is no good. And why I say that? We must understand how our political structure works in our country. In our country, if you look at the political structure, there's only one powerful man in the government, in the political government, the prime minister. The prime minister is, inverted commas, all powerful. The rest of the cabinet are just there at his behest, if I may say that. So in that sense, therefore, if you have a prime minister who stays very long, 20 years, 30 years, then he's able to actually design the cabinet to his taste.
Yeah.
And you actually have one person deciding for the whole country, which is dangerous, unless we turn him into a demigod lah. Which in our country, we love to turn politicians into demigods.
Well,
if not Nudge, who else?
Anthropologists would argue in a sense whereby, 10 years, you don't necessarily see a certain pattern, but after 15 years, then there's a shift in terms of becoming either a dictator or something worse.
Authoritarian, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But we need to understand why that happens. See, what happens is, with time, you can do many things. Say, for example, you talk about one term. In one term, you appoint you're the Prime Minister, I appoint the Cabinet. And in the first term, I got to look at many political considerations. I got to see, okay, especially in a coalition, I have to see, I need the support of Party A, therefore I need to give certain juicy ministries to Party A. So those considerations will take place in the first term. Let's say I also win the second term. Now in the second term, the first term considerations are not so relevant anymore in the second term. Because by the second term, I already put certain people in the judiciary, in the civil service. Oh, that's how power works.
Your grip has strengthened already lah.
You know, I already put all my KSUs, all strengthened. So when I go to the second term, I'm more powerful than the first term. Can you imagine when you go to the third term? When I go to the third term, I almost own the country. And you're talking about third term in 15 years. Those who are born today, they're 15 years old in my third term. Forget about that. Those who just graduated at age 24, in my third term, they're 30 plus. And they are the ones who've been promoted in my ministry. So I am a very powerful man in the country in my fourth term. So we are talking more about the political dynamics and the appointments in the civil service and all that. It is pure Machiavellian structure or political engineering. Yeah, if you look at it, it's actually very common sense. It's got nothing to do with the greatness of the leader. As to whether or not he performs well as a dictator, that's a separate issue. So I would say this. I would say that if we were to have more than 2 terms for a person, we are actually looking down on our own workforce, on our own talent pool in the country. Are we saying that only these 10 people in the entire 30 million are most capable?
Right.
Come on lah.
Well, okay.
So I think the rakyat need to give themselves more credit. Rakyat needs to give themselves more credit. Janganlah rakyat ni terlalu menghina diri sendiri lah dengan mengangkat pemimpin terlalu tinggi sangat.
Well, with that, we had one event that transpired in the whole rallying of Turun Anwar, right? But and to be fair, our Prime Minister himself has actually allowed for people to engage in such discourse, right? It's like that democratic right. He did mention that. But do you see protests such as that as a democratic right or a democratic breakdown?
Okay, if I may, and I must apologize first. You see, the way you ask that question, to be fair, the Prime Minister has allowed. That's dangerous. Must the Prime Minister allow or disallow this? I'm not blaming you, but that's the perception that most people have. I mean, after all, Anwar allowed it. My God, do we need the allowance of a Prime Minister for this to happen? It should be an institutional right. It should be as common as breathing. Well, it should be like that. In Malaysia, I am a rakyat. I should be able to protest if I want.
Okay.
As I said earlier, that protest, that's a political protest. Okay? I mean, after all, Anwar himself and PKR is a party of protests.
Reformists.
Well, I would say party of protest. Whether reformists is a different story, yeah? But they were a party of protests. They were protesting since 1998. They went to the streets. So, of course, if you are from that party of protest, you cannot even say no protest. But I will not go for this saying that the police have allowed.
Okay.
Police allowed probably, but Prime Minister allowed. My God, that's bad.
Okay, the only reason because it's still within the Peaceful Assembly Act. I mean, we still have that PAA Act within our context, right? So again, don't want to give some sort of wrong impression that we can just go out to the street and just picket. I mean, it's still within that
confines.
Within that confines.
Okay, to me lah, I hope you don't edit this part. For a simple, it's a very good thing that you said the way you said it, because you're also the product of a system, and that's good because that shows how the perception is so alive, even the mind of the media. So that's brilliant. But coming to this protest, we must be very careful when we analyze protests. There are protests on social issues. Let's look at it differently. There are protests on legal issues, human rights protests, for example. So protests are of different nature, depending different messages, different import, different impact. If you're talking political protest, that's a different story altogether. So Turun Anwar could very well be, to me, it's a political protest. because Turun Anwar, they did not specify for what reason Anwar should turun and so on and so forth. So it's just a political protest. To me, if I'm a politician, I would say you want to protest politically, carry on, as long as it doesn't disturb the public order. Because the criteria should be, does it disturb public order? It doesn't. Biarlah. It is a political protest. Politics is circus in this country especially. So let the circus go on. But we're concerned about if there is a crackdown on, say, legal protests or social protests, then we should ask, why is this protest happening? This protest happening because there's no avenue for institutional feedback. Like the Ombudsman, for example, like proper avenues to talk to the ministers. Like, for example, is our constituency punya centres, are they working well? They should be working well. That should be the correct place to go and complain and so on and so forth. So these are the things that we need to look at, and these are the areas for reform.
Okay. And then I think more student engagements as well, right? I mean, student voices to be heard as well, right?
Yeah. Because if you recall, the only time the politicians actually engage with the public is during elections. The moment post-election, they have their speeches in 8-star hotels.
Okay.
Yeah, among their elites, and they go to the event after event. And I always wonder if a politician keep going to event every day for 2 years, where you got time to work? Huh?
Yeah. Well, I do agree. Just going through the reforms that we are seeing, or at least expected to see, we've spoken about the freedom of information, we've spoken about Ombudsman, and we've briefly spoken about the separation of the Attorney General and Public Prosecutor roles, right? Alongside whistleblower protection enhancements, but the whistleblower aspect, we haven't expanded on that. Do you think our current, especially kind of breakdown for whistleblowing practices is foolproof already for people to participate?
Okay, my humble opinion on the Whistleblowers Act, it is generally sufficient. Of course, there's room for improvement, greater improvement, in terms of whether or not, if, for example, like a recent case, I don't mention the name of the case, where if you've already gone to the media and so on and so forth, you qualify for whistleblower. Because my view, it should not qualify. There are room for improvement, but generally speaking, I would say that our current Whistleblower Act is sufficient. The only question every time is enforcement. Whether it is enforced or not enforced.
But because we saw how the act is not made complicated, but because the circumstances surrounding it is complicated in the form of, the situation with Albert Day. Like, he engaged in whistleblowing, but he himself is, well, I think it's...
That's what I'm saying.
That, right?
Yeah. If you go to the public, as he has, he's gone to the mass media, etc. So how do you expect to be protected under the Whistleblower Act? Because see, the idea and spirit of the Whistleblower Act is this, as I understand it, that you work in NST. Example, you work in NST and you find there's corruption in NST, and you want to reveal that corruption, and it's your immediate boss. How do you do that? Ordinarily, we're scared to say that because if you go and report, then you are scared that you will be victimized.
Sure.
So you go to the MSC and say, look, my boss is corrupt. He's getting durians every week. But I want to report and I want to be protected. That's when the protection comes into place. So you're protected. So your identity is not revealed, you're not called as a witness, and so on and so forth. But information taken from you. That's the primary spirit behind the Whistleblowers Act.
Well, can't shoot yourself in the foot in the beginning and then claim protection otherwise.
Correct.
Okay. Another one is the political financing bill. I think
very important,
but I think it's still being maneuvered, or at least being ironed out. What gaps do you think we should still address immediately, at least in the next couple of months?
In principle, I think we need a political funding act, so that I think with the political funding act, number one, political funding becomes transparent. Number two, it also got a very huge impact on how our budgeting is done. National budget. A lot of people don't see this. Why is it national budget? Who gets the contracts? Are those who are getting contracts those who funded you politically? And number three is it's going to help a lot in curbing corruption, because which is political funding. Today without the political funding act, a politician can say that this 30 million or the 100 million I got is political funds. Who decides?
Okay.
So in that respect, it is totally relevant, important. And in that sense, I must commend at least the efforts made by this Madani government that they are coming out with a lot of bills, and all this takes time.
Sure.
So in that sense, I'm quite comfortable.
Right.
That this Madani government is indeed reform prone.
Yeah. Whether or not it completes all these reforms within
That's
this
a
period,
separate story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Datuk Sri Zalina has reaffirmed that like the government at least is engaging with the public with a nationwide sort of survey in terms
She's
of what the
aggressive in reforming. She's
yeah,
good.
and in terms of even to understand what the public, how the public perceives political financing, because again, it's a generational thing, I suppose, and I think the whole push for reform within this particular context is for transparency, for declaration, the fundings and stuff like that.
But okay, yeah. I have a question, right? So just interested in your opinion on this. What we want is a political financing bill,
Right.
for transparency in terms of who provides money for whom, right? Yeah. So I think we can see somewhat of a structure of this already in the US, correct?
Correct.
Whereby you have companies, lobbyists, companies which donate to the GOP,
Yes.
donate to the Democrats,
Right.
But but what is the outcome actually in the end, basically? Because I think there is an understanding that, okay, fine, if you are a backer of so and so party, certain things will go your way, right? Yeah. So that's just for public knowledge only, lah. Pretty much.
No, okay. I don't think we should copy the American model outright. I think we should have a kind of a model, in principle, generally speaking,
Sure.
that after you know who they are and what they are, how much they are, I think it is important also to be able to somehow address or identify what is the benefit that the funder expects.
I see.
I think that's very important, because on one hand, it would be unfair for the funder to give up money for nothing.
Sure.
It could be very well that the funder just wants to support democracy.
Goodness of their heart, yeah, sure.
But nevertheless, we should always steer on the side of caution. We should always steer on the side of abuse. That's what we want to prevent. So I think the bill need to be thought out very carefully as to how do you also take care of the interest of the funder if there is an interest.
Sure.
Yeah. So all these things need to be ironed out. We don't want to have an ideal act which is not practical and cannot be implemented.
Of course.
Well, again, hats off to Datuk Sri Zalina for having to exercise all this push, because it is part of the bigger move to combat corruption, right? It's part of the NACS, basically the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which has a deadline of 2028. And we see a lot of updates coming from her division. Anyway, again, like we don't have much time to discuss every single thing that transpired for 2025, but I would like to end this particular discussion with a question on social cohesion and how public policy is able to drive it. How law and order, if it's upholded properly, can actually lead to harmony. Datuk Sri, in your opinion, do you think Malaysia today is so different with Malaysia 20 years ago, and why? How? How can we be better?
Okay, we are different in a lot of ways, of course, lots and lots of ways. But on social cohesion, I am of the view that laws are able to avoid conflict. Laws can avoid conflict. However, laws cannot manufacture harmony. So that was social cohesion or harmony is a very complex issue. That complex issue will involve law, of course. It also involve culture. That culture, talking about the national culture, which we are very confused. We don't. Do you realize we don't really have a national culture?
Sure.
Even though you talk about Malay being the national culture, we don't have a national culture.
It's a melting pot,
If I ask you, what is a Malaysian dream? What's your answer? Your answer could be, Malaysian dream is of an Islamic state. Malaysia is a welfare state. What is a Malaysian dream? We don't have a common Malaysian dream. So there are these kind of packages you've got to look at one by one when we talk about social cohesion. So having said that, however, I think I hope Anwar pulls through his anak Melayu, anak Cina, anak kita. And that's a very powerful narrative to work on. Because we must realize, all Malaysians must realize, put aside political rhetoric. Put aside the political rhetoric that depends on racial and religious narratives. At the end of the day, on the street, we need to live with each other. We need to bring back food for our family. We need to take care of children, our grandparents, and so on and so forth. So that requires true human cohesion between us. And for that to start, we must change our culture. Our politicians must change the narratives. And I really think that we need to have some kind of law which either outlaws or makes it illegal for politicians to get support based on purely religious or racial, this kind of it's very bad. It's very toxic. So I would say that, yeah.
How would you counter arguments of saying that even if we, as we are debating this or as we are discussing this, we're actually over-regulating culture? Like, how would you counter that? I mean, to have like a certain standard or benchmark of what Malaysia should be, right? Because
yeah, but do you know that we are already having that? We are already having that, both socially and both legally as well. Especially the Malays. The Malays are over-regulated. As far as that's what you have to deregulate. I'm saying that needs to be deregulated. I am saying, with respect, the Malays should want to regain their dignity. They must say that we want to determine our lives without being told what to do by the politicians and by the religious clerics. They must say. They must say that they're adult enough to decide for themselves. That's important. Until that happens, tak boleh buat apa.
True.
Okay. Very briefly to close the show, aspirations for 2026. We start with, let's start with Naj first, and then we go to Datuk, and then.
I'm very interested in the build-up for the next general election and see where the chess pieces move into play. I'm also interested in seeing the various pieces of legislation that are planned to go through this year, such as the FOI and a few others, and see how they materialize and how they are crafted actually, and how it will basically have an impact on the people, And I think mine are purely very grounded. Very limited, actually.
Datuk, before I go to you, I for me personally, I would really love to see how the Online Safety Act is being upholded, how platforms are going to be abiding by our own regulations, because I feel to some extent certain incidents have been pushed to that way due to the unregulated sort of content that is easily accessed. And one, of course, in the form of having to radicalize or push our young to commit violent acts, right? We didn't go into specific cases, but I'm sure those who are watching, you'll be able to know what sort of incident we're talking about. I mean, earlier on, Datuk Jahaberdeen did mention about it.
In relation to what you just said, here again I must commend Datuk Seri Azalina. She's heading this Online Security Act. Also recently there's an Online Security Council. I think that council has got a very important role to play in that respect as well. While we encourage freedom of information, expression and so on and so forth, we also should not allow toxic, dangerous, subversive kind of media material in the I agree with. So that's something we need to do as well. But on my hopes, my hopes for 2026, I'm with Naj. I'm excited that quite a number of the bills and acts have been passed this year by the Madani government and hoping to be passed. I want to see fruition in next year, inshallah. Especially FOI, for instance, is very good. Malaysian Multimedia Council, an exciting thing to see how it works out. And I pray that it's got bite and tooth. And the online security, cyber security, and the Ombudsman, and many others. So they have lined up quite a number of wonderful to me, I'm very practical. If they're able to achieve 50% of it, Alhamdulillah. I think the Madani government has done very well in those reforms. Because at the end of the day, we must realize, while we criticize the Madani government, I'm not saying they support or not support.
Sure.
While we criticize the Madani government, we must recognize the institutional reforms that it's trying to do. And institutional reforms are very important because institutions will outlive human beings. Good institutions will be able to maintain integrity in the country. And that's exactly what we want.
Understood. Well, as 2025 comes to a close, Malaysia once again finds itself in a familiar place. We are, battling between reform being promised and reforms being delivered. But what's certain is that whatever institutional change that's being set on paper must reflect in the public experience, right? And with that, I'd like to thank our guest, on set, Datuk Sri Jahaberdeen, Mohamed Yunoos. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Datuk
so
Sri,
much.
for being on Beyond the Headlines. Hope for you to have a very good New Year celebration ahead.
Inshallah, my prayer for you too.
and having to have a wonderful 2026 coming ahead for you as well. Thank you, Naj, for being here.
Always a pleasure.
And to our audience, if you do like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. You'll not only get NSC Beyond the Headlines update, other NSC Online's news reports will be delivered to you. Now, of course, this is one part of our series of year-enders. Do stay tuned. We have our business segment, our sports and entertainment, as well as crime and defense. Now, follow us on our socials. We're everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, as well as X. My name is Amalina Kamal, and we'll see you next week.